I'm Joseph Robertson. I go by Robbie, and I work with Pharma UCB that has the US headquarters here in Atlanta. I spent about more than a decade as a data scientist slash software engineer providing data science-based solutions using software technology. And then I moved on to pharma, and I've been working extensively with post-market real-world data from analysis perspective. Along the way, we realized that there are opportunities to develop medical devices using that data, and we have been pursuing that. Obviously, I'll not be going into specifics of what we are doing, but given the perspective that I have as somebody from software engineering developing, and now doing it as a regulated device, what are my experiences? One of the first things I realized is it takes a village to develop a medical device, anything regulated. A lot of specialties. You're talking about, if I walk from bottom of the funnel all the way, yeah, you need your software engineers, quality engineers, data scientists. These are various skill sets in software industry. But then you top it off with clinical expertise, clinicians, your real-world evidence people, your compliance people, your regulatory people, and all come with specific skill sets. And when they talk to each other, when a regulator sometimes talks to a software engineer, I've been on both sides, right? And those of you with teenagers know the glass eye, right? When you talk to your child, you know immediately that nothing you're saying is going through, but they're looking at you, right? Nothing will stick there. I've been on both sides of the glass eye, receiving information from regulators or compliance people, but doing my own thing. Then when I had to lead teams and talk to and had to sit with FDA or interact with them, hear from them what they have to say. So I'm just going to share some of the perspectives along the way, what I hear. And the whole goal is, given the diversity of the audience, maybe communicate the empathy that you might need to talk to people on the other side. Some of the things we're going to be talking about, what is real world data? And maybe it'll be preaching to the choir what we hear for this audience, but I will talk about what is a SaMD software, but from a perspective of how I want to tell a software engineer or a data scientist. So this definition, what is real world data? This is actually from FDA's by the way, this is the number one challenge, documentation. I don't know if you know. The software industry in the last 20 years actively trained people not to read documents. This is the reality. In fact, if you look at Agile Manifesto, every software that's developed today probably is using Agile methods to develop. And the number one thing in Agile Manifesto is working software over documentation. They are actively, systematically trained not to create or read documents. Look at sample code, create software. That is the culture. But to create a medical device using software, you need those people. So training them back to read documents is one of the main things we have to do. And one of the things I was pleasantly surprised when I had to read documents is that the amount of effort that has gone into creating quality documents within FDA. All my references, quotes will be from FDA's documents over here. This is the definition of real-world data. It's very simple and purposeful and calls out two things: or data relating to patients' health status and delivery of healthcare, collected from various sources. It's very hard to come up with such a succinct definition for something that's so comprehensive. But let's dive into this. What is real-world data? So real-world data really is anything that you could potentially collect or observe about people. Using FDA's words, what are the data that today you can collect about people? The health status. If you think about it, health status, if somebody's getting some lab work done, that's data that gets collected. Or diagnosis made by a doctor, right? Like, okay, this person has this kind of disease, or nowadays, omics data, meaning your genomic panel, this kind of data where you run and you get your gene type, and that can give information about predisposition to a lot of diseases. That's a data too. But then, of late, people are getting sensors, right? Apple Watches, you're wearing things and you're collecting streaming data about your conditions. And it need not just be generic devices. People are coming about disease-specific devices. A lot of products out there that are trying to predict, for example, in my area of expertise, epilepsy, one of the hottest things is, can you predict the onset of seizures using some device, right? So all these generate data. So essentially, the sources of data is becoming more and more. Now, in the healthcare delivery settings, again, like your health record, electronic health record, think about that. That is a data source. Or claims data, I'm sure you all know about it. It's actually a billing data, a simple billing data, except that it contains information of drugs dispensed, quantity dispensed, time dispensed, when it was refilled. Suddenly, when it is collected across a large number of patients, it becomes a very important data source. And registries are a major source of data too, because a lot of diseases have specific registries where people register and collect information about those specific registries. Like I'm sure you heard about SEERC, like largest cancer registry, or for pretty much for every disease area, there are registries which contain information specific to patient. But so those two cover health data as defined specifically by FDA. That's health status data and healthcare delivery data. But this, the last one, that is also generally considered real world data, and it is becoming more and more and more relevant today. Think about entire e-commerce. In fact, I'll be quoting Amazon as not direct, but as a relevant example all along. If you think the whole Amazon's business, it is structured around the last 2 or 3 aspects, especially your behavioral data, what you do online. That data, when Amazon has, they say they have 150 million US Prime members. So when that data is collected for 150 million people, they're able to enable this huge business for us. And socioeconomic data, we know that predisposition for a lot of diseases are social factors or economic factors. And that data is today available in many forms. So we can bundle even that with real world data. But why is this relevant? Because when you just look at the type of data without the context of numbers, just why is this relevant for a data scientist, especially in US? The reason is the diversity it brings. Because today in US, we have ability to collect many of these data sources for about 300 million people, a very large number by any means. And then there are over 1 million physicians who are active across various disease areas. And just the structure of the data, there are 70,000 diagnosis codes, 10,000 procedure codes, so 95,000 metrics and lab measures. And then there are thousands of medications in the market. Now think about the diversity we have. So we might say the claims data is just a billing data, but when it has information with this kind of diversity, when you mix together, that becomes a data scientist's, heaven in terms of ability to mine and give. In fact, this is all, you can say the bulk of this is post-market data that is available to monitor what's happening. My day job is essentially looking at this data for signals. And what we feel is, like in the industry, this data has source to come up with a lot of solutions in the area around medicines. So essentially come up with solutions for medical purposes. So that's why this is relevant. Like when I look at the healthcare data, now, how does this data fit in a flow as a solution? Let's quickly go into that. So let me actually quickly define what is software as a medical device. Like this is actually the formal definition. It's a device intended use for medical purpose. So what makes it regulated is, why it has to go through regulatory purposes is this definition, that it's a software, meaning what is given out as information. However, it is considered a device. The fact that it is considered a device, right, calls it for medical purview, for regulatory purview. if you had to grossly oversimplify what is the purpose of a medical device, treat, cure, or diagnose. Yeah, we go into super specific information on what those mean. But if you look into FDA documentation, this is what excites me for a data science perspective. These are quoted as additional SaMD considerations for medical purpose. So if you look at, if you call out the keywords, determination of predisposition, or a prognosis, or a prediction, determination of psychological status. These are all either prediction or inferences or information that we can give. These are the areas where data science works best when it comes to predicting something, looking at data, and coming up with a future state. So these are the considerations, given the context of all the real-world data, gives plenty of solutioning opportunities. You think about any chronic disease. What is the natural progression of the disease? Usually, disease onset happens even before anybody. I mean, for genetic disease, it's always there. It manifests at some point in time. But for other diseases, there is an onset time where even patient does not recognize. So the first opportunity is, can you predict onset with the data? Or if the onset is there, can you predict severity? Can you predict progression? So these considerations give you opportunity to come up with devices. So this is where the opportunity is. So if I had to grossly oversimplify all these things, this is how the flow will be. So you have all the real world data. If you can collect the data, right? Now, I have to put up a big disclaimer. This is probably the grossest oversimplification you're going to see. It's a very hard problem. But having said that, today, you can go out in the market and get reliable, humble billing data for 300 million patients. Out of that, maybe 150 are active, actionable, where you can build devices. And this ecosystem of health records being consolidated, that is happening really fast nowadays. So, and this data, the behavioral data, you go to Equifax or any other vendors like our Axiom, you can buy for the entire US population. And there are data vendors like DataVant who are coming into the picture, who are providing you the combination of these data in anonymized form for you to discover. So if you have means to take and create solutions, again, this is a kind of oversimplification, but if you can identify a gap in care right over here and think of a solution. So where do you find gaps in care? If you go to any medical conference, like even today, like there are very many specific medical conferences, right? You go for a neurology conference or cardiology conference. I'm sure there are thousands of publications where students are doing researches. Usually these are the good grounds for ideas into solutions for gaps in care. But if you're able to advance that and conceive of a solution that you can deliver using some means, that becomes a SaMD with real world data. So that's the whole 9 years of that. Why it is exciting for me today in this context, today, not many years ago, the confluence of technologies that is bringing this together. For these things to happen, there are many things that has to come together. The delivery method, for example. Think about the prevalence of your iPads, your iPhone phones, or the EMR systems. That's there. The broadband is there. The connectivity is there. The high computing is there. Advances in AI is there. So what I feel is the confluence of all the technologies are there at the right place, and we are at the starting block. Sometimes it's actually exciting to be the starting block, right? So that's why when I look at this whole picture, yes, there are a lot of challenges today, but those are the opportunity. Okay, we saw what is SaMD and what is real world data. How do you tell? How do you bring in? How do you communicate this whole picture to a data scientist and create an environment where you can develop? This has been a big challenge because in real world, if you think of a regulatory involvement in a software development as an afterthought, as many people do, they come up with this nice software, the solution based on some need, and then they realize that it has to be regulated. And at that time, if you would have built in a lot of traps for yourself along the way. that you'll uncover during regulatory review process. So how do you bring in a culture of awareness right from the beginning, and how do you communicate it? Going back, there are so many documents, so many things around. After working on a device for a long time, this one diagram really spoke to me. This is in this particular document called Software as a Medical Device Clinical Evaluation. This is one diagram that puts things together. I use this today if I'm bringing on a new team member, this is the first diagram they're going to see. Now, some people might ask, why do they have to know? Why I, as a software engineer or as a QA engineer, need to know? Because we'll go into this. There is a very nice method on how everything connects. So if you're looking at a medical device, this is the framework that I would encourage. In fact, this is an agency's perspective, right? First, look at the definition. What is it used for? And the clinical condition. Again, why should an engineer care about the clinical condition? Because the engineer is going to be helping to gather data downstream. And everything about that will be providing evidence for the clinical condition. So they need to be aware. So that is number one, the definition angle. The second one is, of course, the risk evaluation. So the awareness of these categories is very important because the risk determines the level of evidence, 10,000, 100 pages or 10,000 pages. So that awareness upfront, the more upfront you can communicate to your entire team about this, will put the burden on them to look for appropriate evidence in the data. And the third thing is, of course, the development process that we talk about. This actually is rather well understood in software industry because it is still process driven. But what the industry may not appreciate much is the call out over there for verification and validation, which is very different. So the way, at least as I learn to understand the way agency works after multiple interactions with the agency is two things are paramount. Risk, as Blake said, risk is everything. And the second thing is evidence. So how does this work? I, as a manufacturer, claim that I'm going to do something. That is the intended use, number one. So agency is going to come back and ask me, what is the risk? And I articulate it and I give justification. And then agency is going to ask me, what is the evidence? So it's very simple if you look at it that way and plan for all three right from the beginning. And this is where I see a lot of misses, because the kind of evidence that is required for clinical association or even your clinical validation, there are a lot of best practices and patterns in the software industry that may not be acceptable today. For example, think about Amazon, 150 million people, Prime members. They're creating dynamic algorithms that learn every day. What do? When they create algorithms, do they have a validation set that is set aside to validate every recommendation? Probably not. But let's say you are an exciting pharma. You have money, you want to create a device, you go to a data vendor and buy, let's say, EHR or claims data from this vendor for all US population. And you give it to your data scientist to deliver a device, and they come up with this massive algorithm. Then your regulatory colleagues come and tell, okay, this is good. Let's make a device out of this. And then you go and ask the data scientist who previously used to work with Amazon, what data did he use? I used all the data I had and created it. So then your regulatory, no, I need a set-aside data. I need test data. Because they can go to vendors like IQVIA and buy all available US claims data. Then your data management team might come and tell you, oh, we bought data from IQVIA that has 300 million patients. So what test data can we use? They might, why don't you go and buy from different vendor? But that vendor is going to source from the same upstream people. So suddenly, you have created an algorithm that is tainted, that cannot be taken anymore, and you don't have an option of test data. So this is a problem because data scientists are so used to cross-validation, which is technically sound, but you don't have a sample data. So this is why this culture of awareness, I mean, right or wrong, that's different. But to get approval, you have to do certain things. So you might have to set aside a data as a culture within your organization, right from procurement. And this may have implications downstream, because it's not like organizations can buy data just for regulatory development, something for something else. You can't go and tell the rest of the organization, hey, the 20% of the data that I'm setting aside cannot be used for any purpose. So you have to think through a culture of evaluation, clinical evaluation, validation right at the start. Otherwise, it's going to be very expensive and make you paint into corners. So that's why I love this diagram. And whenever somebody comes in, I give the whole picture. This is it. And when it comes to AI, ML, and these are the frameworks that are, again, just for sake of communication, yes, agency, this is really hot. Like we are still talking about it. Even the action plan was presented only in 21. PCP, how the agency is planning to regulate, the opinion came about in April this year. That's how recent this is. So how do you train data scientists and engineers to think about it? Not in specifics, but in abstract. These are the 5 areas that the agency cares about. Yes, we need a framework, number one. Second thing is we need consistency in your machine language practices. Opinions are there. There is another article out there. Then the third one is actually very important. As we start looking at it, the patient centricity. That is, how are you going to tell the patient what your device is doing? End of the day, patient doesn't care whether the device is a software device or a physical device. There has to be either an intuitive definition or an overwhelming public opinion on how to use it. I mean, blood pressure is an arcane number, but has been with us for more than 100 years, so we agree. You can't come up with some arcane measures that does not communicate clearly what it means. A risk score, for example, right? A risk score for a particular kind of disease. Yeah, you can bring it through, but how do you communicate it? What is the input to that? All those things, irrespective of how your algorithm use it, we have to think through that. So that's the third pillar, patient sensitivity. And of course, the fourth thing is always a problem. Like with every algorithm, if you're looking at historic data, bias is going to be a factor. You have to debias it. And that burden is the huge, because, I mean, bias is one thing that's been proven over and over and again. Like even today, as I digging out and weeding out bias, right? How do you eliminate age bias, gender bias, ethnicity bias? There will be no obvious factor indicating that, but it'll pick up. You give a zip code, it'll pick up bias, right? So you have to be very careful. So that awareness. And the last one is, okay, if an algorithm is out there, how are we going to monitor and manage? So I look at these pillars so that this gives me an awareness of what the agency is looking for. So why such a framework is important is this will help us to create a complete package. So this is how at least I look at the overall action plans. So the tips, as I wrap up, number one is lead with the regulatory at the earliest opportunity. Don't think of regulatory as an afterthought. The other side of that is if you're a regulator or if you're a regulatory liaison, be aware that literacy has to go down all the way to last developers. If you're just talking to the managers or leads about regulatory, you are setting traps, because if the engineers are not aware of that, end of the day, they will, cause challenges. And the evidence requirement is something that, again, a lot of times it's done as an afterthought, so establishing that upfront. And this thing, like we have to establish, because today the industry standard is cross-validation. Industry to data science, it's a very established method, proven method. All softwares are built with it. So unless you tell your engineers that you have to explicitly validate with a set-aside data set, that's almost a gold standard thing for agency, you're going to have challenge over there. And one last thing is, again, this is number one challenge, especially I work with the other university that I don't know if I'm allowed to mention it over here, the Georgia Tech, a lot. And we have to fight for talent. That's a reality. If you want good engineers, you go over there. I have to fight for talent with the people who are more excited about working for Teslas and Apples and Amazons. And there, when I go and tell them, come and work for medical device, first of all, no 21-year is interested in medical things. So it's very hard to get their attention. And then you tell them, you have to work in data technology, right? You have to work under so many constraints. It's not very motivating. But we have to be realistic, because if we try to be on the bleeding edge of things, as we saw, we're not ready. I mean, given the fact that AI is so far ahead, we are still approved only blocked algorithm. So the last thing is tip for entrepreneurs is recognize that it's an evolution. We are in the starting blocks. And just to wrap up, but what excites me is the fact that we are at a good place as a starting block. It's not very often you get to be on the starting block of many things. With the intersection of the data, the devices, broadband, connectivity, whatnot, hey, I think we are at starting block. And that, this could be an ideal platform to launch a 25-year career. So it's a great place to be, and that excites me. So thanks for the opportunity.